All right, so welcome to week two of this mess. Um, so today we're going to be talking about really entering conversations and supporting your claim. How do you bring this all together, essentially? Um, and I think we talked in class, and we might have even done the exercise, I don't remember, um, of the idea of coming into a party that's already going. And when you come into a party that's already going, you don't just walk into a conversation and start offering your opinion. You come in, you listen to people you've asked, you kind of ask, hey, what are you guys talking about? And people let you know what they've been talking about. And then you make a well reasoned insertion into the conversation. And that's what we're trying to do now. You're entering conversations as academics that, in many cases, are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. And you don't just come in and start going, well, here's my opinion, here's what I think about the thing. Um, this is why we study. And you show that you have an understanding of that by bringing sources to the table and by using those sources effectively. Um, a lot of times in the past, you have been asked to make an argument um, and argue for one thing. And so, what people do is they just bring in this entire one sided conversation based on a pre existing notion of what they think should be. And in college, we ask you to be a little bit more complex. We want you to go out, do some research, and then based on the research, make a claim. Not just dive in, make a claim, and say, this is what I think, and bam, here I go. We want you to show a nuanced understanding of the topic at hand. Um, the this is the difference between being somebody who is just making an argument and somebody who is becoming part of a conversation. Part of the difficulty that you run into is that you are you really don't have your own personal authority to stand on. And so what you do is you borrow authority. You borrow ethos by using the ethos of people who are already respected professionals in the field. And those are your citations, those are your sources. So you make an argument using those sources and by weaving them together. Um, this is at the heart of any well-researched argument, is allowing those sources to speak with you in making an argument. And there's a lot of different ways that you can bring evidence to the table. Um, you can bring just basic facts, you can bring statistics, expert testimony, somebody who is an expert in the field who has spoken on this subject, observations, if you've gone out and you've done field research. You can bring examples of something that you're talking about. A lot of times, depending on the field that you work in, especially those of you who are in the sciences, you can bring case studies to the table. Um, you can use anecdotes. Now, anecdotes can't stand on their own, right? But you can use an anecdote as an example of the point that you're trying to make. So there's all kinds of ways to support your argument. You just need to be sure to bring those to your paper. Now, counter evidence is perhaps one of the most important differences that you're going to run into as you make your paper. And it's one of the things that a lot of people aren't used to doing coming into college, because we've been told take a side, right? Well, you need to take a side. You need to take a position on this. Don't no, you can't have it both ways. Well, you kind of can have it both ways. Now, with counter evidence, what you do is you are bringing somebody into your argument that disagrees with you, and you're talking about it, and you're showing that you have an understanding of that argument. Now, that doesn't mean you're agreeing with it, by all means. You're certainly not. But what you are doing is showing a nuanced understanding of the topic by saying, okay, this is the claim that I'm making. This is a person that disagrees with it. This is why they disagree with it. This is the evidence that they bring to the table as far as why they disagree with it. But I believe it anyway, and here's why. Here's where I feel their argument is flawed. And by showing that more complete understanding, you establish your ethos to a much, much greater degree. In fact, you might even have doubts about your thesis, or you might have, before you did your research, you might have felt completely differently about your topic, and it was through your research that you came to the understanding of the topic that you have now. Bringing that up is not a bad thing necessarily. Um, So don't worry that bringing a naysayer or counter evidence to the table is going to undermine what you're doing. If anything, it makes it stronger. Now, the one thing that I will say is you probably don't want to put your naysayer or your counter evidence at the end of your paper. Because remember, we remember the first things we read and the last things we read. And if the last thing they read is the counter evidence, they might come away feeling that that counter evidence is stronger. So I typically recommend bringing that counter evidence at the beginning, and then throughout your paper you show in various places where the opposition's argument falls apart. Um, Now, one thing you might want to consider, and I strongly recommend this for pretty much all of you, is is sneezing. No, is bringing visuals to support your argument. Graphs, charts, these types of things, timelines, maps, these types of visuals that take evidence and present it in graphic form are really useful for building your logos, right? It shows the logic behind your argument, and really then from there helps establish your ethos. By showing your strong logos, you're establishing your ethos. So those are useful for doing that. Now, on the other side, things like drawings, cartoons, pictures, screenshots, these are more emotionally evocative. And there's nothing wrong with using pathos. Now, you don't want your pathos to overwhelm your logos. But by using these things that bring out pathos, you can build your argument as well. And it's perfectly legitimate ways of doing so. Make sure that you're using them effectively. Make sure that if they're in your text, you're referring to them in your text. Use a caption, okay, explaining what the source is and why what it's doing there, okay. But visuals can be a very strong way of building your argument. Now, one of the other things you're going to want to make sure that you do with your sources is you want to evaluate them very, very carefully. There's nothing worse than bringing a source to an argument that really either undermines your credibility because the person who wrote it has no credibility in their own right. For example, if we look at the anti-vaccination movement right now, the person who published the original anti-vax paper is in jail right now for fraud, for basically defrauding people in his work. He made up his numbers. So really consider who your sources are, where they come from, understand who they are before working them into your paper. Also, you really want to analyze your sources carefully. Understand what the point is that they're actually trying to make. There's nothing worse than thinking that your source is saying one thing when in fact it's saying something completely different, and you find that you're arguing against yourself. An example of this that I experienced was when I was editing a book. One of the authors that we got to write a chapter in it is one of the biggest names in feminist science fiction, and we were reading through her paper. I was reading through her papers like a final check, and a big claim that she made hinged on the fact that the elephant was the symbol of the Democratic Party. Well, the problem is that the elephant is actually the symbol of the Republican Party, and so her entire argument from there forward was completely invalid, and that was like 3.5 pages of his argument. So you really need to consider and analyze your sources carefully before using them. Next, what you need to do is bring these sources together. You need to synthesize them. You need to understand how one source speaks to another source. Because as you're writing your paper, what you're doing is you're taking these disparate sources. It's like taking ingredients for a stew, right? You don't eat all the ingredients separately. You mix them together, okay? And by mixing them together, you come up with something different that's uniquely yours, as opposed to saying, here's my potatoes, here's my meat, here's my carrots, and I'm going to eat a carrot, and then I'm going to eat meat, and then I'm going to eat my corn, right? They're different things that way. Bring them all together, use them together, make them speak to each other, okay? one of the big decisions to always make is whether you want to quote a source, whether you want to paraphrase a source, or whether you want to just summarize what the source is saying. So consider each one and the value of doing each one of those things. If you're using a quote, the advantage of a quote is that you're getting the exact words from the person. Now, this can be very useful, but overquoting tends to make it look like somebody else's work. Okay? So what you want to consider from there is is the language perhaps too elevated, right? For the people who are reading it, do I need to use something to paraphrase as opposed to quote it because the language isn't quite right for my audience? Or is there really no other way to say what needs to be said as well as what the author did? We paraphrase when the source has good information, but perhaps it's not easily understood. Okay, or there's a variety of other ways to say it that might be more clear than what the source says. And a lot of times, this is what you need to do. I tend to find paraphrasing is better most of the time, as opposed to direct quoting. If you can break it down, it'll also make the language of the paper seem more uniform because it'll be your language more throughout, as opposed to a bunch of different quotes to where the language isn't as consistent. So most of the time, I'm going to recommend paraphrasing a source as opposed to a direct quote. Finally, summarizing is useful when there's a lot of information said over like 3 or 4 pages, but the audience doesn't really need 3 or 4 pages. They need a quick, succinct delivery of that information. You can take that 3 or 4 pages and basically bring it down to 2 sentences. This is what was intent. This is what the author said. Another thing to look at is your signaling phrases. And signaling phrases, I think, are one of the most overlooked tools in the writer's toolbox. So, a lot of times we end up with things like he said, she said, they said. You just get the same thing over and over again. Maybe we'll go so far out as to say, oh, so-and-so stated, right? We can step beyond that. Now, first time you refer to an author, you use their full name, okay? Mary Jones. Okay, Mary Jones states that, whatever, okay? Now, after you refer to Mary Jones by first and last name, from there you only refer to her by last name. So, Jones quotes, right? Or Jones focuses on, or Jones maintains that, okay? So, consider how you might mix up your signal phrases. Think of the person's attitude towards their topic. If they're saying something funny, right, they quipped. If they are making a claim, they asserted, right? Don't just say said or states. Think about the person's attitude towards their topic. And your book has a list of signal verbs to take a look at. So take a close look at those and see how you might mix that up. The other thing to consider is your placement of the signal phrase. So you can say, Oscar Wilde claimed that da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Or you can say da-da-da-da-da, Oscar Wilde claimed da-da-da-da-da. Or you can go da-da-da-da-da-da, Oscar Wilde claimed. So you can have your signal phrase at the beginning, you can have it at the end, or you can even have it in the middle, depending on how you work it. All right. So take a look at those as far as how you want to proceed with your paper and as far as integrating and using your sources. Make sure that you have your appointment set with me during the week. Make sure you keep up with your discussion boards. Those aren't going anywhere. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, mhoward@langston.edu. Or just set another, if you can have more than one appointment with me during the week if you want to set another appointment with me at WC Online. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Wash your hands.